G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day, and this is one of my analysis type videos about situations of what I've found interesting and that I want to talk about. Today's going to be a bit about asymmetrical warfare, and I know we talk a lot about Russia and Ukraine, but we need to look at where else Russia may have interest. And I noticed something the other day when I was talking about a speech that Vladimir Putin made when he was in Uzbekistan, and it lined up with then a few other things that I've been seeing recently in some of my research, and then looking down Russia's overall asymmetrical strategy, a lot has lined up. Now, of course, what I'm talking about is Afghanistan. Now, Afghanistan, both the Soviets and the coalition, well, they failed in their overall mission in Afghanistan. For the Soviets, it was to maintain and implement a communist leadership, and for in the coalition, it was to install a democratic leader and a democratic country with then human rights in line with our world order. And I deployed as a young man on one of those missions, and both had drawn out wars, cost many lives, billions of dollars, and then ultimately had failed. Now, those who will contest about the failure of the coalition in Afghanistan, I say, if you're an alien looking down, you spent 20 years, hundreds of billions of dollars, many lives, and you left the country and the people you're fighting better armed, better trained, and in charge of the capital. Who really won? You do not need to win a single battle to have then won the war. But let's look at this, and why would this make sense for Russia to have influence in Afghanistan? So on the most simple basis, and we'll look at the reasons for this, and it comes down to some pipelines and some minerals, as war always does. It's always a political objective. Let's look at Russia. Now, this is Russia across the top here. Of course, here is Kazakhstan. Then we have Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, areas we're going to talk about. And of course, then we have Afghanistan. Now, in Uzbekistan, if you think that all of these press conferences with Putin are scripted, why would he then talk specifically about taking the Taliban off then a terrorist list? But regardless, and what does this give then Russia? Well, from Kazakh, Uzbekistan to Afghanistan, you then have a direct land border with Iran, as well as then to the beginning of the Caspian Sea, where Russia also has border with the Caspian Sea, also Armenia, Azerbaijan, and of course, what we need to talk about is Iran then shares a border with Turkey, of course, NATO. So what I'm talking about here is this land bridge, especially down into Iran, of course, a massive grower in Russia's support and allies for the war currently going on in Ukraine. So we're going to look more at this, what put me onto it, but let's have a look at then the Soviet Union, then republics here too, and we can see Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and then Afghanistan down here. This is then, of course, the crux of the Soviet invasion to install a communist leader in Afghanistan that was ultimately then pushed out by Mujahideen funding from the CIA. All of this, same as then us with our own mission there down seeing our own world order. And I really, so you should read Henry Kissinger's World Order. Is really good to speak about how countries see their own world order. Speaks about China, and that's interesting in this as well. So the thing is, Russia's asymmetrical warfare has changed dramatically from then till now, and we'll talk about Entente colonialism as well. So let's then look at this and what first perked my ears up specifically to this. So on the 26th of May, Putin was in Uzbekistan speaking. Now the question was asked, considering the possibility of removing the Taliban from a list of terrorist organizations. Now, as well, many people say all of these are scripted. So if it's scripted, why is it in there? That's a good question to ask. Putin says, I'm looking at the second part, I cannot be denied that there are problems in Afghanistan. Everyone knows this well. How can we build our relations with the current regime? It is a different question altogether. However, we have to do it. These are people controlling the country, its territory. They're in power in Afghanistan today. We must proceed from reality and build relations accordingly. Trust me, this will all link in, even if we seem like we are up in the air. Now, the Kazakh president explains decision to take the Taliban off terrorist watch list. This happened, I believe, at the end of 23, start of 2024. So we have then Kazakhstan removing Afghanistan off terrorist watch list. Now, this is from the Kazakh president, Tokayev's comments with Lavrov, of course, foreign minister for Russia, referring to the Taliban as long-term factor and reality, like we saw then Putin talk about the reality, long-term factor of who's in power in Afghanistan. We're not about to roll back in and overthrow then the Taliban. Now, we continue here. This was on June 13th, so this month, in St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, which attended by Taliban delegation since 2022. A formal proposal to Vladimir Putin to remove the Taliban from Russia's list of designated terrorist organizations was submitted from Justice Ministry in Russia. Kazakhstan took a similar decision in December 23. Uzbekistan has never designated the Taliban as extremists. So we have the countries we need through here. Now, the ISW also reported on this as well. The Taliban acting minister of Labour and Social Relations, this bloke gave an interview to the Kremlin TASS state media on June 6th, quoting the Taliban, saying, looking forward to Russia's decision to exclude the Taliban from a list of banned organizations in Russia. Now, why would Russia do this? We're going to get further down into that. Then we need to talk about then Turkmenistan down in here. Now, of course, not as crucial for the land bridge through to Iran, but still we need to then talk about Turkmenistan. Since the beginning of this year, there's been an intensification of contacts between Turkmenistan and Afghanistan around key topics such as implementation of the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, TAPI pipeline. This is really critical to Russia's asymmetrical war influence in here. TAPI pipeline. Remember that. That's what we'll be speaking then about next. And then we have then this as well, as Russia's relationship with the West deteriorated. However, the Kremlin's view of the Taliban changed. In August 21, the Taliban closed in on Kabul. Western diplomats rushed to shutter embassies and evacuate. But the Russian embassy remained open, and within 2 days of takeover, Russian ambassador Dmitry Zhukov had become the first foreign diplomat to meet the Taliban representatives. After the encounter with Zhukov, proclaimed the Taliban fighters as reasonable guys, and the Taliban began providing security for the Russian embassy. Now, what are some reasons then for this? Now, let's have a look here. Now, first off the bat, the Taliban are sitting on $1 trillion worth of minerals that the world desperately needs. Afghanistan is one of the poorest nations in the world. Mineral deposits of $1 trillion, iron, copper, and gold. There are also rare earths and one of the world's biggest deposits of lithium, an essential but scarce component in rechargeable batteries and other technologies, of which we know where the world is then shifting. But more importantly, let's talk about the TAPI pipeline. Now, of course, this runs from India. Let me put this across. India, Pakistan, Afghanistan to Turkmenistan. So all these countries here working in conjunction. You might go, Willie, this has nothing to do with Russia. It's not running anything, to Russia or out of Russia. But we need to look a little bit more out of the box at this, and this explains it well. Russia is helping Pakistan build out its natural gas infrastructure. Though this won't facilitate Russian exports of natural gas to Pakistan, the aid isn't altruistic. Russia expects Pakistani gas demand to divert Middle Eastern supply from Europe to Pakistan, increasing reliance on Russian gas. So what they're trying to do is divert Middle Eastern supply from Europe. So let's have a look down Middle East, these gas and oil giants down in here, divert this away into then these pipelines in India and well is in Asia, and then have Europe then further reliant on Russian pipelines and resources in here. Let's talk a little bit more on TAPI. The overall execution of TAPI pipeline is not without geopolitical implications. Anyway, for Moscow, the pipeline is alluring because it is not merely a gas transit project, but also connects South and Central Asia on the basis of strategic needs and interests on the countries in both regions. Thus, a potential key player in the project, Russia would be able to expand its influence in South Asia. This is what Russia is trying to do, is expand influence in then the Asian region. No doubt, Russian participation in the TAPI pipeline would be a real step forward for Russia's vision with the greater Eurasian partnership. Moreover, faced with Western sanctions over its invasion of Ukraine, Russia wants to strengthen its strategic partnership with energy-rich Turkmenistan. So, of course, Turkmenistan comes back into the fold. Ashgabat is unwilling to export gas to Turkey and further to Europe if that would endanger its partnership to Moscow. So, Ashgabat, Turkmenistan, is not willing to then push gas into Europe if it would endanger its partnership with Russia, therefore increasing Europe's reliance on Russian natural gas. Ashgabat is clearly coming down on the side of Russia and spawning opportunities to move its gas to western direction. It has chosen to move towards its authoritarian brothers in arms, Russia and Iran. So overall, you need to look sort of outside of the box at where this may then sit. Now, this is part of what people are calling Entente colonialism. Now, of course, Entente means a friendly informal alliance between states, and called colonialism. I'm sure everyone but uni students screaming it in some people's face know what that is. Now, one of the things where Russia is having success in this is that Russia will work with countries and or regimes that the West will not work with, such as the Taliban. And, well, I should say at least on large scale publicly outside of maybe some intelligence bloody agents all around the world doing some dodgy dealings, but on a whole, officially, they will work with regimes, officials, states of which we will not work with. Now, let's have a look then over this. And I'm sorry if this is boring, but it's something that has been on my mind for ages. Colonialism, Wagner and GRU. Of course, GRU is Russia's military intelligence, but we also need to take into account here the SVR, another intelligence but outside of Russia, as well as then the FSB as well, what came out of course, the KGB. And I'm sure you're familiar with these. Vladimir Putin, speaking at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum in June 22, President Vladimir Putin declared the West was still influenced by their own misconceptions about countries outside the so-called Golden Billion. They consider everything a backwater or their backyard. They still treat them like colonies and the people living there like second-class people, pushing the message of a Western superiority complex. Putin saw the development of economic ties with Africa and the Middle East as by means of sanction-proof Russia, and he had a pitch for the leaders of those states. It centered around the proposition that the international rule-based order advocated by the West structurally favored Western interests, whereas Russia's emphasis on sovereignty, keep in mind this, would offer a mutually beneficial relationship. The reality, Russian officials acknowledged internally, was renewed Russian colonialism. Nevertheless, the Kremlin, through the GRU, military intelligence, has now set about seeking to build Entente Roscolonial, a group of states that actively seek to assist Russia while also becoming increasingly subordinate to Russian influence to displace Western interests. So as well, that Russia back your government, they'll put in security, whatever you need, pushing on then your sovereignty, but of course they have their fingers in the pies too to get what they want out of your country, whether that is by minerals or whatever else there. The Malayan government signed a peace agreement with the Tuareg and Arab rebels in 2015. UN peacekeepers deployed to prevent clashes between both sides. Led by France, Western states pursued a strategy of trying to provide human security in isolated communities while conducting counterterrorism raids with the G5 group of Sahelian states. There were many problems with this approach. The counterterrorism operation was fundamentally about protecting Europe through the targeted killing of jihadists. At the same time, the peacekeeping mission shielded rebel groups from being confronted by the state. But the lack of political progress and consequent economic stagnation drove people to banditry. While communities might be safe from the physical attack in towns guarded by the UN, they also had no prospects, and the Malayan military felt unable to implement a policy that would change the dynamic. So this stagnation that has caused in what they say here to then try and protect Europe, what then of course buys into what Putin is saying up in the beginning of that first slide. Russian encouragement of the Malayan military to reclaim the state's sovereignty from its Western partners proved persuasive. They launched 2 coups, but the second coup on 24th of May 2021 was set about laying the groundwork for Russian mercenaries to enter Mali. The Russians promised to provide soldiers and equipment to the Malayan armed forces to aggressively attack rebel communities. Russian forces began to arrive in December 21 and have since succeeded in getting Mali's international partners for over a decade expelled. We saw this particularly with France. Russia is now replicating its offer to Burkina Faso and Niger. So, of course, this all ties into that Entente colonialism and minimising Western influence there, pushing on sovereignty. But Russia's not, of course, doing this for free. The offer The GRU is being internally described as a regime survival package. The logic of this offer is that Russia will provide elites in target countries with military support, economic, political protection from backlash via the UN or other international mechanisms. So you do this, will provide you then security, economic, military or political protection and the support of political technologists to sell their popularity domestically. A critical component of the package is the isolation of target countries' leadership. For example, in Mali, the Expeditionary Corps, as occurred in the Central African Republic, now provides presidential protection. So Expeditionary Corps, this came out of Wagner PMC as well. So provide presidential protection. Since this proximity ensures sustained understanding and influence with the Malayan decision making. So they have finger in the pie. However, the effect of this offer is too close off the relationships that a country has with the West. Very often, the conduct of massacres or other violations of international law will prevent Western partners from maintaining links with the partner military. Spoke about at the beginning, will provide sovereignty, protection, political, economic, regardless, to partnered militaries, regimes, officials that we may not or will prevent Western partners from. It is worth noting the Russian approach is consistent with the tenets of Soviet anti-partisan warfare, involving the use of collective punishment, hostage-taking of local political figures, and aggressive raids to kill insurgents. The effect is often the defeat of an insurgency group, but the absence of stability or human security. The result is that Russian security partners initially gain sovereign capability through Russian mercenaries and medium-term personal security. However, they also dependent and lose access to alternative security providers. But in many countries, this may actually be more successful than maybe the West coming and go, we want to implement democracy and this or that, where some people might go, no, we just want that village over there who's giving us a hard time to be bloody massacred. Anyway, let's continue here. The Entente was colonial is a serious threat to Western interests. First, with the US increasingly fixated on the Indo-Pacific and European attention saturated by the war in Ukraine, most African operations have become economy of force affairs. Moreover, the disparity in resourcing attention paid to Ukraine or Gaza as compared to Tigray for existence has left a strong and bitter sense across Africa as to the hierarchy of Western concerns, exactly with what we looked at here by their own misconceptions of countries outside the gold billion. They consider everything a backwater or backyard, second-class people, because they consider themselves exceptional. This leads into the messaging of this. Is this true? Is it not? Regardless, if you can put that in informational campaigns, messaging, then you can see how successful this can be. Now, there's more in this too, that the SVR, FSB, GRU are constantly pushing that the West is demonic, that they don't have the nuclear family, and there's a loss of values. This value system is corrupt there too, which not only do they push that information and propaganda, but as well, I don't think we help ourselves in making that propaganda available either. For instance, there's left a stronger bitter sense across Africa as the hierarchy of Western interests. Similarly, the apparent contrast in Western language and rhetoric about how has been described the destruction of Aleppo or Mariupol, and how it's excused Israeli operations in Gaza, leave many on the continent perceiving a gap between Western rhetoric and the values practiced by those who have for so long imposed constraints on the policies of African states enforce value-based norms. The language used when rejecting Western security assistance in favour of Russia is almost always that of sovereignty. Russia also is exploiting an opportunity to then push migration into Europe, creating then political destabilisation, and leverage over natural resources is expanding. Perhaps most problematic, however, is the pitch for values is giving Russia access to communities that interface with a range of extremist beliefs. So this is very interesting to look at, and that I know they're talking a lot about Africa there, but I think we can apply the same to somewhere like Afghanistan and this influence and that out of the box asymmetrical thinking of then the gas tappy pipeline as well. Now, I may be way off the path. I might be directly on the path. Let me know what you think. What do you think of Entente Ros colonialism compared to influence from, say, the West into Africa, and how is that seen as well? And I can completely see if you're someone living in the Central African Republic or Sudan or Mali or something, and not that much has changed for you over decades. I can see why you might go, well, let's give something else a bloody shot, especially if it more falls in line with the military or policing that occurs there. Anyway, have a fantastic day, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.